There are still a lot of key RFA players in the NHL unsigned at this point in the offseason. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the top 10 remaining RFAs that are unsigned, and I'm going to give you my predictions on what they're likely going to get for a contract. We'll discuss that coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams. So if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. We have a lot of remaining RFAs that are still unsigned here in the NHL. Now a few of them are arbitration eligible and have hearings coming up within the next week if contracts are not already agreed to. But many of these guys don't have arbitration rights and could drag on longer into the offseason, possibly into training camp. The number 10 player on my list is Josh Morrissey of the Winnipeg Jets. Morrissey became a very important defenseman here in the past couple seasons for Winnipeg, playing some key minutes here in that second pair with Jacob Trouba. Morrissey ended up putting up 26 points last year, logging over 20 minutes per game, was a very integral part in their playoff success as well. Like I said, he's become a very important defenseman. Now if you take a look at his totals and what he brings to the team, and you could compare that it is relatively similar to Trouba, but Trouba does have some more years of experience on him. Trouba's got about 5 years in the league, where Morrissey has 2 complete years. Obviously, Trouba just got a $5.5 million one-year deal through arbitration. Morrissey's not arbitration eligible at this point because he doesn't have enough years in the NHL as of right now. So I can see Morrissey probably getting a bridge deal here. Based on the other guys that the Jets need to lock up, as we've discussed a few times, they are kind of up against the cap, and they could end up with some cap issues and some cap casualties here in the next couple of years. So I see Morrissey probably getting like a bridge deal, probably around 2 years, around $3 million or so per season. I think based on some other contracts you've seen, like for example, like a Brandon Montour, obviously he got a little bit more than 3, but I think he brings a little bit more offense to the table. So I can see Morrissey maybe getting a little less, closer to $3 million, bridge deal, maybe 3 years, but I think 2 is probably the more likely landing spot. Next up in the number 9 spot, I have Shea Theodore of the Vegas Golden Knights. Obviously, as the year went on, Theodore became a bigger, more important player on the back end for the Golden Knights as well. He did start the year playing some games in the American Hockey League. Obviously, they picked him up in the expansion draft from the Anaheim Ducks. They just had a lot of players early on. Everybody had to kind of find their spots, find their places and where they fit. There were some guys, like I said early on, like Theodore, that just couldn't get any time in the lineup. But he kind of forced his way into it, and once he got in, he played well, made it tough on the coach to take him out, and he just kept building his value to the team and how much his role increased throughout the year. He was a huge part of their playoff run. I think long term, he could very well be a top pair guy for them if he keeps developing at this pace. He ended up getting into 61 games last year and put up 29 points, logging over 20 minutes per game when he did play. So I think at this point in time, I see Theodore getting a pretty decent contract, but more likely going to be a bridge deal. I'm going to say that Theodore likely gets either a 2 or 3 year contract, somewhere between $3.25 to $3.5 million. Again, if you compare this to the Brandon Montour deal, and if you look at Brady Shea, I think he's going to be somewhere in between, but closer to the Montour contract. He brings a similar type of offense, but he's still young enough with less experience that I don't think he's going to get that bigger money or the bigger term just yet. But I think if he continues to play at this pace, continues to develop, his next contract would be the longer term deal with the bigger money. Next up at number 8, I've got Ondrej Kase of the Anaheim Ducks. Now Kase is an interesting case as well, put up 20 goals last year, was an exciting player. His role also increased with them quite a bit throughout the year. Really, to score 20 goals and his average ice time was less than 14 minutes per game. So he's not getting a ton of ice time, but when he's on the ice, he's really taking advantage and capitalizing. I think longer term, he's got a real potential to develop into a solid top 6 forward and be a good player for them for a long time. But considering the little bit of experience that he has in the NHL, I don't see him getting a longer term deal at this point in time. I can certainly see him getting a shorter term, kind of a bridge contract here as well. I'm going to say Kase likely gets a 2-year deal, somewhere around $2.5 million. I mean, it could be a little bit more. And I know there's a lot of guys scoring 20 goals, making more than $2.5 million, but he's only done it the one time. So I can see him getting a shorter. Now, he may opt for a 1-year deal too. It just kind of depends where things are at with his agent and where the team sees him. But I don't see it being a long-term deal. But I'm going to say 1 to 2 years, 2.5, maybe $3 million, but I think it's going to be closer to the 2.5 range. Next up, we've got Sam Reinhart of the Buffalo Sabres. Last year had a pretty decent year, I think, 25 goals, 25 assists. I know Reinhart's kind of gotten some criticism over the years for not developing into the bigger star player that he might have been projected to be. Obviously, he was a high draft pick, With a high draft pick comes high expectations. Not sure he's quite lived up to that when he came out of junior, but really, I think at the same time though, yes, he has his faults. He's not a perfect player. He does have his weaknesses like any guy on the ice, but he does have some really good strong suits as well, and he is showing improvement year after year, and he's still quite young. Every year in the NHL, he has improved his point totals. 25 goals is pretty impressive, especially playing on a bad team. I mean, the Buffalo Sabres have had some bad years the whole time he's been there. So he hasn't exactly had a chance to play with high-end players a lot. And as his team continues to get better and bring in more prospects, obviously, they've had Eichel for a little while now. This year, we're going to see Rasmus Dahlin. We're going to see Casey Middlestat. Things are only going to get better. And as he gets to play with more highly offensively skilled players and continue to develop on his own as well, I think those point totals are going to continue to rise here. So I can see Reinhart maybe getting a 4 or 5 year contract, to be honest, around $4 to $4.5 million. That's kind of where I peg Reinhart. Next up, we got defenseman Darnell Nurse here from the Edmonton Oilers. Now, Nurse is another interesting case here. Obviously, he's not the most offensive guy in the back end, but he does play a fairly significant role for the Oilers, playing a lot of minutes, put up 26 points last year. So if you compare that to like a Josh Morrissey, for example, you could compare them on the offensive side of the game. I think you could argue that Nurse might be a little bit more valuable to the Oilers than Morrissey is to the Jets. He's been playing about 22 minutes per game, but at the same time, it's also because the Oilers' blue line is not as deep and as strong as the Jets' blue line, so that certainly plays a factor as well. I think the best value for the team would be to kind of try to lock him up for about 4 to 5 seasons. Like I said, he does have some value. His play should only get better, especially as the decor around him gets better as well. The whole team needs to improve their defensive game here. But I can see Darnell Nurse locking in probably around the $4 million range. Another player I kind of see in that 4x4 range. There has been some speculation he's been looking for more than that. Not really sure that he's worth more than $4 million at this point in time. Kind of depends on how long he's willing to sign for, I guess. If you can get him for 5 years at $4 million per year, by the time you get the midway point of that contract, it probably seemed like a bargain. But even $4.5 million wouldn't be terrible at a 5 or 6 year contract. Kind of depends on where the Oilers see him going here longer term, but he's still another RFA to keep your eye on. Next up, we got Kevin Hayes here of the New York Rangers. Now, Hayes is an interesting case as he's arbitration eligible and has a hearing coming up here in the near future. So, obviously, at this point in time, the Rangers and the Hayes camp do have some time to continue to negotiate, but it seems as though the Rangers are reluctant here to kind of pay him what he feels he's worth. Hayes has been with the Rangers for over 4 seasons now. He's really, he scored 25 goals last year. He's really a pretty consistent 40, 45 point plus player, often playing in a top 6 center iceman role. So really, I think he is going to get paid. I can see him getting somewhere between the $4.5 to $5 million range. But it looks as though they're heading towards arbitration. I have a feeling this is going to end up going through the full process here, and he's likely going to be granted a 1 year deal, somewhere between $4.5 to $5 million. That's where I see him. I think he's going to get a comparable contract to Mika Zibanejad. Obviously, Zibanejad and Hayes are the top 2 centers on the Rangers, and they actually have comparable statistics, and you could argue that they do play very comparable roles for the team. So I'm not really so sure why they're so reluctant to get this done. So overall, I think Hayes is certainly going to get the money he's looking for. He's around $4.75 to $5 million, but it doesn't look like they're going to come to an agreement on their own. I'm going to predict this one goes through the arbitration process. He ends up with a 1 year deal. Next up, we've got Dylan Larkin of the Detroit Red Wings. Now, Larkin's still quite young and still developing and really improving all the time. Obviously, the Red Wings had a tough season last year. Larkin's goal totals might be down a little bit, but his assist totals were way up, cracked 60 points. I think that's only going to continue to get better. The Red Wings had a great draft this year. They're going to be infused with a little bit more youth again this year. There is some, obviously, debate on whether or not Henrik Zetterberg is going to be able to play this year, and only time will tell if that may or may not be the case. As we know, he's been battling back issues for the last few years, and it just might get to the point where it might be too hard on him to continue to play. So we really won't know the answer to that until training camp rolls around, and likely he's going to go to camp and give it a try, see how things feel. Either way, I expect Dylan Larkin's role here to continue to grow on this team, but if Zetterberg can't play, players like Larkin and Mantha are just going to be that much more important to this team and on the ice and in the dressing room, and as they continue to grow and kind of take on leadership roles within this team. So I personally don't see any reason why the Red Wings wouldn't feel comfortable locking him up a little bit longer term than a lot of these other players. I could see him maybe getting like a 6x6 deal, 6 years, $6 million. Maybe he falls closer to that 5.5 range, but I think somewhere 5.5 to 6 over a 5 to 6 year term would suit Larkin quite nicely. I can certainly see him being a 70-point player this year. You know, he's becoming quite a playmaker. He's got wicked speed, as we know, and I certainly think he'll be worth the money as he's given more and more opportunity and surrounded by some better players here as well, as some of their prospects come up into the lineup and they get infused with some more offensive younger players who can also skate with them as well. So again, I think Larkin's deal likely gets done before training camp here. I don't see it dragging on too long, and I think he's going to get a fairly nice long-term contract here from the Red Wings. Next up, we have a very interesting case, and that's Wild Bill. William Karlsson of the Vegas Golden Knights obviously had by far a career season last year, putting up 43 goals, just shy of 80 points. Prior to that, he really didn't have a whole lot of offensive success at the NHL level. Been playing with Columbus. I believe his career high was 9 goals the year before that. So that's what makes this so tricky, is not only did he have a career year, but he absolutely blew his totals out of the way. Obviously had way more opportunity. You know, as we all know what kind of happened here with this Vegas Golden Knights story all season long. So where does a guy like this go? Now, a lot of other 40 goal scorers are really raking in the money and they're really getting paid. Not that Karlsson doesn't deserve it, but I don't see him getting a contract. You know, some other guys that have hit the 35 to 40 goal mark, you know, maybe multiple times, 2, 3, 4 times in their careers. So what do they do with Wild Bill? There's 2 ways they can go here. Now, he's obviously arbitration eligible, which makes this tricky. He's one of the last hearings coming up here. I believe it's August the 4th or 5th is when his hearing is scheduled for. So they do have some time to get this done on their own. Now, if they get it done on their own, I think he's going to end up somewhere around the $5.5 million range, and I would probably go 5 years. If you look at what Riley Smith and Jonathan Marchessault, his line mates, are getting, and you look at how important he is to that line and to the success of this team and what they did this past season, I really think that I think it's fair that he get a comparable contract to what they're getting. So they're all around, you know, that $5 to $6 million range. So I think he kind of falls into that same kind of bucket. No more than 6, maybe closer to 5.5. But I think he'll probably end up possibly taking a little bit less years. But they could very well try to get him locked up 5 or 6. But he may not want to do that if he bets on himself and says, you know what, I think I can keep producing at this rate. I like this team. I like my line mates. I can keep this going. If I take a shorter term, I can really cash in here in a couple of years. So depends on how him and his agent feel about it. But I can certainly see him falling in that $5.5 to $6 million range. You know, on that mid-range contract, except he may opt to go 5 to 6 years. I think Vegas likely would want to do it. Just not sure if he would. If this does go to arbitration, then it's likely going to be, you know, a 1 or 2 year contract, probably around the $5 to $6 million mark as well. But I think they could get something done sooner, give him that long-term security. You know, obviously he's a player who's just getting himself established in the NHL. As much as he might want to bet on himself, he might want that security as well for the term. So it's a tougher case to figure out, I think. But if I'm Vegas, I'm trying to lock him up for 5 to 6 years at $5.5 to $6 million. Now, next up, another interesting case here is the Toronto Maple Leafs' William Nylander. Obviously, the Leafs have had a big summer here signing John Tavares. They've got extensions in the works here for Marner and Matthews. But really, the one contract that needs to be done before the season kicks off here is William Nylander, who's an RFA as of right now. To be honest, I'm a little bit surprised this deal isn't done as of yet. Now, I know the Leafs, like I said, have had a busy offseason. I don't think they're too concerned about getting, you know, the negotiations completed here and getting something signed. Obviously, in the next couple of years here, they do have some other contracts coming off the books, which could, you know, help him kind of cash in better at that point in time. So we'll see what happens here. But I mean, William Nylander's had some pretty good years with the Leafs so far. He got 2 full seasons in, put up 60+ points. You know, you can bank on him for 20+ goals for sure, depending on where exactly he slots in the lineup with all the offensive firepower that's likely going to increase again this season. To be honest, I see William Nylander being a $6.5 to $7 million forward. It's just a matter of how long they give him this contract for. I mean, more than likely, though, with everything going on with the Leafs, I think he's going to end up having a bridge deal, 2 to 3 years, $6.5 to $7 million. And then I think at that point in time, if he continues to play the way he's expected to and his development continues to go, you know, obviously being a right-hand man for Austin Matthews, I can see that going up, and then maybe in, say, 2 years' time, getting an extension. Obviously, I don't see him getting Matthews money or even Marner money, but I think he'd be closer to Marner and kind of level things out here in a couple of years' time. Now, last but not least here, we've got Ottawa Senators restricted free agent Mark Stone. Stone is arbitration eligible, having 4+ years in the league. So there's another interesting case here. I know earlier in the offseason, it was indicated that Ottawa really wanted to lock him up long term, and I'm sure they still do. Based on everything going on with the team, like, he could potentially be a future captain of this franchise. He has great leadership qualities, great on the ice, off the ice, and he's arguably been their best forward for the past couple of years. In my opinion, Mark Stone's a very underrated two-way forward. He's led the league in steals and takeaways quite a bit here in the last few seasons. Mark Stone had a tremendous year last year on a bad team. Obviously, had a bad season, but he put up more than a point per game. He scored 20 goals multiple times, and he's proven to be a clutch player in some clutch moments for this team. So personally, I can see, if they get the long-term deal done, I can see Stone getting an 8x8 if that's the route they decide to go at. Some of the last arbitration hearings are for Stone and William Karlsson, so they'll be very interesting here as we head into August if these things are still dragging on. But I can see him, if he goes to arbitration, probably getting a 1-year deal around $7 to $8 million. So those are my top 10 RFAs that are yet to be signed and where I think their contracts are going to land. I'd love to hear your comments down below. Let me know what you think, where you think these players are going to end up for contracts. If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams. There's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, hit the like button as well. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll catch you next time.